The house smelled like her for exactly 3 days after she died. After that, it just smelled like a house. I noticed it on a Thursday morning, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I didn't really want, watching the snow come down in the backyard. 41 years we'd lived in that house. 41 years of her garden in the summer, her Christmas wreaths on the door, her reading glasses on the nightstand that I still hadn't moved. And then just like that, the smell was gone. Like the last physical proof of her had quietly packed up and left without saying goodbye. My wife's name was June. She was 63 years old when the cancer took her, and she was, I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make her into a saint, just because she's gone. She was the most quietly competent person I've ever known. A retired hospital administrator from Hamilton, Ontario. She had managed multi-million-dollar budgets, restructured entire departments, negotiated with provincial health authorities. She had a mind like a steel trap, and the patience of someone who had spent 30 years watching people in crisis make terrible decisions. She also knew our son better than I did. I see that now. I didn't see it then. His name is Preston. He's 36. He married a woman named Delia 4 years ago, and the two of them lived, I should say, up until recently, in a condo in Mississauga, about 40 minutes from our house in Burlington. Preston had always been difficult in the way that certain children are difficult. Not cruel, not violent, but entitled in a bone-deep way that no amount of good parenting ever quite fixed. He believed, without ever examining it, that good things would come to him because he deserved them, that the world owed him comfort. When June got sick, something shifted in him. I told myself it was grief. I told myself he was scared, that watching his mother decline brought out the worst in him, that I needed to give him space and grace and all of the other things you tell yourself when you don't want to see what's actually happening. What was actually happening was that my son had started looking at our house the way a real estate agent looks at a property. I remember the first time I caught it. June was upstairs sleeping. She slept a lot toward the end. The medications made her exhausted. And Preston had come over with Delia, ostensibly to drop off groceries and check in. I came downstairs from checking on June and found the two of them in the living room. Preston had his phone out. Delia was looking at the built-in bookshelves along the east wall. She said, and I remember this exactly, these would actually be easy to remove, opens up the whole room. She hadn't noticed me on the stairs. Preston said, the kitchen's the issue. It hasn't been updated since what, the 90s? I cleared my throat. They both straightened up like teenagers caught at something. Preston said, Dad, hey, didn't hear you come down, I said. Your mother's sleeping, and we didn't talk about it. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. We ate the soup Delia had brought and talked about nothing, and I drove home in my own head the whole rest of that night, telling myself I was being paranoid, that they were just making conversation. June died on a Tuesday in February. The hospice nurse was there. I was holding her hand. It was quiet. The way death sometimes is when it has had time to approach slowly, and everyone has had time to prepare. The minister came, the funeral home came. Our neighbors, the Pattersons, came and sat with me and didn't say much, which was exactly right. Preston arrived 3 hours later with Delia. I want to say this carefully, because I don't want to misrepresent it. He was sad. I believe that, he cried when he came in. He hugged me for a long time in the front hallway, and it was a real hug, not a performative one. Whatever else I came to learn about who my son had become, the grief was real. But, within 40 minutes of arriving, Delia had gone upstairs. I assumed she was using the bathroom. She was up there for a long time. When she came back down, she had a notepad. I am not making this up. She sat down at the kitchen table and said, in a voice that I can only describe as carefully casual, we've been thinking, and we just want to float something. Preston and I have decided to take some time off work to help manage the estate. It would probably make the most sense, logistically, for us to move in here while things are being settled. I looked at her. I looked at my son. Preston was looking at the table. I said, this is my house. Delia said, of course. We just think it would be more practical, given everything. I said, I'm not going anywhere. There was a silence. Then Delia smiled, and it was a practiced smile, the kind that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes, and said, Dad, no one is asking you to go anywhere. We just want to help. And so I told myself again that I was being paranoid, that they were family, that grief does strange things to people. I told myself this for approximately 6 more weeks, right up until the afternoon I came home from a grief support group at the church on Guelph Line and found that 2 men with a rental truck had removed my workshop tools from the garage. My tools. 40 years of tools. My father's level, which I had carried from our family home in Sudbury when my own father died. Gone. Preston was standing in the garage when I pulled in. He said, "We need the space. We're thinking the garage could be a home office for Delia." I stood there in the cold, looking at the empty pegboard where the tools had hung, and something settled in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and quieter than anger. I said, "Where are my things?" he said. "Storage unit. We're paying for it. And I want you to understand, I am 67 years old. I worked for 32 years as an insurance actuary. I am not a man who raises his voice." I looked at my son and I said very quietly, "Get out of my garage." He blinked. He said, "Dad said, get out of my garage, and you and your wife will be out of this house by end of the month, or I will call the police and have you removed." What happened next is the part I still think about. Because Preston did not look angry. He looked almost relieved. Like he had been waiting for this. Like now the thing that had been hanging in the air between us could finally come down. He said, "That's actually something we need to talk about. Because the house isn't just yours." I said, "Excuse me." He said, "Mom bought this house before you were married, in her name. And since there's no will." I said, "There is a will." He said, "I haven't seen any will." I said, "That's because it's none of your business until the executor contacts you." This was a bluff. I didn't actually know if there was a will. June had told me, 2 months before she died, that she had taken care of things, and that I should look in the cedar chest in the bedroom closet when the time came. I had not yet opened the cedar chest. I had been unable to make myself open the cedar chest, because the cedar chest also contained a letter she had written me, and I was not ready to read it. I was not ready for a lot of things, but I was less ready to lose my house. That night I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the cedar chest. There was the letter. There was also a manila envelope sealed, with my name on it in June's handwriting. And beneath that, a second envelope addressed to a man named Clifford Oates, QC, at a law office in downtown Hamilton. I opened the envelope with my name first. Inside was a document, notarized, dated 8 months before she died, transferring a property I had never heard of into a family trust. A lakefront property in the Muskokas. 4 bedrooms, a boathouse, 2 acres of land, purchased in 2019 in June's name alone from an inheritance she had received from her uncle in Guelph. I sat there for a very long time. Then I read the letter. I am not going to share the whole letter here. Some things between a husband and a wife belong only to them. But I will tell you what she said at the end, because it matters. She wrote, "I have watched our son for a long time. I love him. I do not trust him with money, and I do not trust the woman he married with anything. I have arranged things so that you will be taken care of no matter what happens. The house is yours. It has been legally yours since 2003, when I had the deed amended and you were too busy to notice the paperwork I put in front of you. Everything else is in the trust. Clifford knows what to do. Call him in the morning. And please, for once in your life, don't apologize to Preston. Let him find his own way." I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time after that. The room was dark. The snow was still coming down outside the window, and I thought about how extraordinary it is to be known, truly known, by another person. How rare it is to have someone understand, not just who you are but who the people around you are, and to love you enough to quietly do something about it. I called Clifford Oates in the morning. He was expecting my call. He had been expecting it, he told me gently, since June had first come to see him 3 years ago. She had been methodical. The house deed amendment had been registered in 2003, he confirmed, making me joint tenant with right of survivorship, meaning that when June died, the house became mine automatically, regardless of any will or any claim by any heir. The Muskoka property was held in a family trust, with specific conditions that I won't detail here, but which effectively meant that Preston could make no legal claim on it. Without a protracted court battle, he was very unlikely to win. "Your wife was an exceptionally careful planner," Clifford said. I said, "Yes, she was." He said, "Would you like me to send a letter to your son?" I said, "Please." The letter arrived at Preston's condo, certified mail I'm told, requiring a signature, on a Wednesday morning in late March. I was not there to see it received, but I heard about it. eventually, from enough different directions to piece together what happened. Preston called me 40 minutes after the letter was delivered. I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. He called 11 more times over the course of that afternoon. I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and watched the calls come in, one after another, and I thought about June and about the level my father had used to build the deck on the back of the house in Sudbury, and I let it ring. Delia texted me. The text said, "This is not what June would have wanted," which I found remarkable, given that it was exactly what June had planned. By evening, Preston had called 43 times. By the following morning, the total was 61. They moved out 9 days later. I had arranged through Clifford for a formal notice to be delivered giving them 30 days, but they left in 9. I came home one afternoon to find their things gone and the spare key on the kitchen counter. No note. I walked through the house after they left. I went into the kitchen and ran my hand along the counter. I went into the living room and looked at the built-in bookshelves that Delia had wanted to tear out. I went into the garage and looked at the pegboard where my tools had been, and which the storage unit confirmed were still intact. Every one of them, including my father's level. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think honesty matters in a story like this. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and very aware of how empty the house still was even after they had gone. I felt my wife's absence in a particular, sharp way that I think had something to do with the fact that she had made all of this possible, that her last act of love for me had been logistical and legal and careful and entirely like her. I also felt, somewhere underneath the sadness, a quiet thing that I think was peace. Or the beginning of it. I hired a young woman named, well, she asked me not to use her name, so I won't, to help me with the estate paperwork, and she was efficient and kind and didn't treat me like a confused old man, which I appreciated. The house in Burlington I kept. The Muskoka property, which I had never even seen, I drove up to see in May, when the ice on the lake had gone out. It was early spring, the birches still bare, the lake very still and very clear. I stood at the end of the dock for a long time. June had good taste. She always had good taste. My son sent an email in April, through a lawyer. The lawyer's letter made several claims about the property that Clifford dismissed in a paragraph and a half. That was the last formal communication. In July, my son called once from a number I didn't recognize. I answered by accident. There was a silence, and then he said, "Dad," and I said, "Hello, Preston." And then neither of us said anything for a moment, and he said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," and I said, "I know." And then there was another silence, and he hung up. I don't know if that was a real apology or a tactical one. I don't know if it matters. The grief support group at the church meets every other Thursday. I still go. There are 7 of us now. A retired teacher from Oakville whose husband died of a stroke. A woman from Waterdown whose daughter died. A man a few years older than me who lost his wife to Alzheimer's, which is its own particular grief, the kind that comes in stages over years. We have coffee and we talk, and sometimes we don't talk, and I have found it more helpful than I expected to. The Pattersons had me over for dinner in October. Their granddaughter was visiting, and she was 5 years old, and she spent the entire evening bringing me things from their living room. A coaster, a small decorative duck, a throw pillow, with great ceremony, and I accepted each one. It was the best evening I'd had in months. I think about June every day. I think about the letter she wrote, and the envelope addressed to Clifford, and all the quiet planning she did while she was sick without telling me, knowing I would have protested, knowing I would have said it was too much, that she needed to rest. She did it anyway. She always did what needed to be done. The reading glasses are still on the nightstand. I've decided they can stay there. Last week I drove out to the storage unit and brought my tools home. I oiled the levels, cleaned the saw blades, hung everything back on the pegboard. My father's level is slightly warped now. It's old, it was always slightly warped, but it still reads true enough for most things. I stood in the garage for a while, just looking at it all hanging there, and I thought, June knew. She always knew, and she made sure, without saying a word about it, that everything would be all right. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything.